Rolling.
So today and tomorrow we're going to be talking about these secret societies, although they're not always that secret. All right, the Knights Templar, it wasn't that they were secret, it's that the legends that surrounded about some of the things that they did are a question of controversy. They're not necessarily conspiracy theories, they're somewhere in between. And tomorrow when I talk about Freemasonry and the Illuminati, sort of it's both ways too. Freemasons are not a secret society. You can go join the Freemasons, but some of the things they do in secret, so people wonder about it. The Illuminati is not a secret society either, but were they really dissolved 250 years ago, or are they still around? These are the questions we're going to be talking about. So we're going to talk about the Knights Templar and the Holy Grail. If you were here for the intro videos, you got an idea what the Knights Templar were about. So it shouldn't come as a galloping shock that I'm going to focus on the Crusades for the first part. And then the rest of the time we're going to talk about all the legends that go along with it and the ties to even modern day. If you have questions, go ahead and shout them out during. If you have like, well, but I thought, or maybe it's, throw it out there and let's tackle it, especially today and tomorrow. So, I know it's so annoying with that's actually the fixed version of the projector. That's as good as it gets. Just live with it. And I know it's like 5 degrees crooked too. I can't fix that either. The Crusades essentially they were a holy war, right? They lasted from 1099 to about 1260. So about 160 years, and the war was exclusively Christians versus Muslims, believe it or not. Look at that. But that was the Holy War, and it was the fight over the Holy Land. This is land that has been fought over for 3,000 years. When you have three groups of people, Christians, Muslims, and Jews, who all believe that this is some of the most holy land on earth, and it's the same land, you're going to have fights over it. So we're going to be focusing a lot on the Templars because they're the holy warriors for the church and their role in the Crusades. Now, when we take a look at this, the First Crusade and the Third Crusade are the really most important as far as the role of the Templars. The Holy Roman Empire cannot be easily divided from the Catholic Church. They tend to be one and the same. So is the Pope behind this? Yes. Here's the fight. The fight's over the Holy Land. This is modern-day Palestine, modern-day Israel. The lines have been redrawn so many times, but the focus is Jerusalem almost entirely in these Crusades. These are your holy warriors. So in the First Crusade, lasted about 5 years. Don't forget, think geography here. Think where Rome is, and think where Jerusalem is. They're not close, okay? Yes, within the confines of the Mediterranean Sea, they're fairly close. They're closer than the United States is, but it's not next door, right? It's a long way. So the First Crusade is the Knights Templar shining moment. Oh, it's sort of a side note. Today is about as close as you're going to get to like a college-level history lecture. This is how the history lectures that I sat in college, very specifically this. It's, there's going to be some information up there, but I'm going to be saying some of the real dirt, so you sort of need to like bounce back and forth between what's on this thing and what I'm saying. Also, good note for some of you, when you're getting ready for your graduation by defense, yeah, there's a lot of words on here, but that's because there's stuff. I'm not looking at this thing at all, okay? That's sort of what I'm going to want from you guys when you do the graduation defense, is you're not checking this. I know what's up there. I wrote the damn thing. So it's that eye contact, the movement, all right? Those are the things I want you to work on as well. So once the Crusaders had the Templars were the vanguard. You see those videos of them? They are head-to-toe chainmail. Chainmail is tiny little links painstakingly linked together like links of chain into a giant shirt. That's draped over you. It stops piercing, it stops slashing. And then they put plate mail on top of it. Plate mail over the head, plate mail gauntlets, plate mail gorget, all of those things. You can't kill a Templar. They're like a walking tank. So they were the ones who led the charge. They were in the van. First Crusade, the Holy Roman Empire wins. They get Jerusalem. The problem is that's all they got. They got that city. They didn't get the route. If we imagine this as a map here of the Mediterranean, or I want you to imagine this in your head because you're so good at geography, right? Let's say this is the Mediterranean Sea, so that puts Jerusalem here, that puts Rome here. Well, or if you're going by boat, that's one thing, but if you're going by land, you've got to go around the corner of the Mediterranean, and that's not friendly territory. So the Templars' job at that point began to be protecting those who were pilgrimaging to the Holy Land. Literally, hey, I'm going to take this 2-month walk to the Holy Land, and the knights are there to protect you along the way. They're the bodyguards, so you don't get killed by who? I don't know, the angry people who you just took that land from. So that was their original creation. Protect those pilgrimaging to the Holy Land. So let's look at the timeline here for the Knights Templar, because we're not really worried too much about what they did and didn't do. We're worried about the legends that came out of it, because that's the fun history. For those of you that are like super huge Knights Templar fans, this is going to be upsetting. They're terrible at winning, okay? They lose almost everything. They won like 3 battles in their lives. And when I say in their lives, over about 250 years. They won like 3 battles. The First Crusade was huge. They won that. But about 80 years later, so these are not the same knights, they lost. There is this, if you are a fan of world history at all, and you know who Saladin is one of the greatest leaders militarily of all time. He was from sort of Egypt, Syria area, and he started combining. A lot of the Muslim tribes were different tribes, and they were under different various factions and lords. He combined them all and said, listen, we can't fight separately. Let's get together under one banner. We're going back to retake the Holy Land. And that's what he did. He united the clans against the Christian Catholics. Boom, popped them out of Jerusalem. The Knights Templar were in Jerusalem for a little less than 100 years. That's going to become important because a lot of the claims are that while the Templars were in Jerusalem, they found all this good stuff. They found the Holy Grail. They found the Shroud of Turin. They found the Ark of the Covenant. And they took all of those treasures. Because what people are looking for right now are Knights Templar treasures. Where did they take it? Where did they hide it? So if you've watched, what's the Nicolas Cage, National Treasure, right, where they're looking for the treasure of the world, you know, all this stuff, and it's the theory behind, this is where things go badly, right? JFK, all the conspiracy theories behind JFK were fueled by the movie by Oliver Stone in 1987. The Knights Templar, the Freemasons, the Illuminati was fueled a lot by the National Treasure movies. They're not based on fact, okay? They're just not based on fact. Braveheart, I love that movie. It's not factual. It didn't happen that way. The Patriot, right? It's this unbelievable movie with Mel Gibson. Not factual at all. Okay? A lot of these things are really problematic because people watch the movies and they're like, oh my God, that's real. And that fuels the fire. We're going to delve into that a little bit, and like most things in this course, you're probably going to be left disappointed because everybody wants to believe, but then I just pour water on that. So, in 1191, the Templars and the Christians are kicked out of Jerusalem, so they fall back to the port city of Acre. Okay, not Acre, all right? Acre. That's their headquarters for the next century. It's a port city. It's not necessarily close to Jerusalem, but they can defend it. That's the third crusade. There's a lot of crusades out there. The fourth through the seventh crusades aren't really major crusades. It's just the Templars being angry and going and killing non-Christians in the name of God. And so eventually we go to 100 years later. So they take Jerusalem. 100 years later, they're kicked out. They fall back to Acre. And then 100 years after that, they're kicked out of Acre. They go back to their island. Don't forget they own Cyprus. They bought it off of King Richard. And 12 years later, they're out of Cyprus too. So if we're looking at their wins and losses over about 150 years, there's a couple of minor victories here, and then a couple they won at Acre and Arsa. But it's a lot of defeats, a lot of surrenders. Essentially, after about 150 years of being in the Middle East, the Knights Templar are kicked out of the Middle East. They're gone. Get back to Europe. Where are they really centered? France, England, that's where a lot of their strength is. Mostly the most famous Templars were French. Okay? So let's talk about post-Crusades Templars. They're no longer a military presence. Why? A, there's nothing to fight for anymore. B, they've lost almost everything. Yes, the first crusade was great. They went and they got their objective. They captured the Holy Land. They didn't hold on to it for very long. And then they just kept boom, boom. They're knocked back and further out of the Middle East. So what do they got? There's something called a papal bull. A papal bull is a decree by the Pope. A decree by the Pope had incredible power in the 11th, 12th, 13th century. The Pope said that the Templars were created to protect pilgrims, and they had to report to no one on earth but the Pope. That meant that no government had control over them. So they paid no taxes, which they became the world's largest and first bankers. You could deposit money in Paris with the Templars and then have a friend withdraw money in Jerusalem with the Templars. That is banking. That is like international banking, and they started it, and they didn't have to pay any fees or taxes on it, so they became incredibly rich because guess what? They charged you for that service. Go into banking. It's the best way to make money. It's the oldest profession on earth, and it's really one of the best. So they've got businesses, they've got banks, they've got property, they've got money, and they are not subject to any government on earth. Guess who hates that?
Government.
Everyone hates that. They have no laws. They have all of this money, they have all of this property, everything that they captured in these minor skirmishes is theirs. And because they are a state within a state, meaning if I'm in Portugal, the Portuguese can't do anything to me. We're Templars. Right? We are untouchable. By the way, we don't pay any taxes in any country, but we'll still conduct business. Think about that. If you had a Templar market here, and you had one business and then a regular business in Spain, they've got to pay taxes to the king. Well, they don't. They lower their prices a little bit. They undercut everyone. They now control everything. Well, that's going to be very upsetting to a lot of people. So because they can't fight anymore, they go to business. And then that sort of upsets everyone. So King Philip IV, he's the guy who's sort of famously taken down the Templars. He did it in a number of ways. He arrested them on legitimate charges like fraud, right? That they were avoiding paying taxes in his country. And he sort of rose up against... King Philip had a good relationship with Pope Clement V, who was Pope at that time. But they also said, listen, the only laws that you're really bound to are the laws to God. You sworn to protect, to uphold God's laws. And then he said things like, they're spitting on the cross, okay? They are renouncing God, all of these things. And what he did was, he took the Templars into his torture chambers, and he tortured them until they confessed, all right? And I'm not talking like little torture, like waterboarding, or he would like crucify them on a door for a week, okay? just hanging, nailed up to a door for a week. Do you confess? Do you confess? And every once in a while, go by and whipping them and things like that. Upside down crucifixion is really bad too. A lot of them confess, upside down crucifixion, no good. Especially when you're crucified on a cross and you're a Templar or you think God has forsaken you. You might think about confessing, and they did. And once they confessed, it's not like they went free. That's when they burned them alive. So the Pope could have stepped in and saved them. This is the church's warriors. At any point, the Pope could have, for whatever reason, Pope Clement V didn't. Maybe he didn't like the power they were getting. Maybe he thought they were sort of separating from the church a little bit, but he did not step in to help. In 1312, the Knights Templar were officially dissolved. Official dissolution is different than them actually disappearing. You're no longer a club, says I, but you still exist. Right? So that's when they went underground, and that's going to be a theme tomorrow when we take a look at the Illuminati. When the Bavarians dissolved the Illuminati, well, they didn't just say, okay, well, I guess we're done. Right? It was a good thing they wanted to keep it going. So that is like the quick and dirty history of the Knights Templar, which leads us into all the other legends. Okay? All the other legends and biblical artifacts. Now, teaching biblical artifacts is different than teaching a religion. All right, so history professors are going to teach you these things existed, they were claimed to be X, Y, and Z. All right, that's what I'm going to do here because the Templars are tied to three big ones. The Holy Grail, the Ark of the Covenant, and the Shroud of Turin. Anyone in the room know what any of those three things are? Anyone ever heard of the Holy Grail before? Right? Has anyone ever heard of the Ark of the Covenant? Because you've seen Raiders of the Lost Ark. Okay. How about the Shroud of Turin? Has anyone ever heard of that? Oh, good. We'll be learning a few things here. Let's start with the Holy Grail. And here's where I want to be very, very specific. There are two holy cups. One is the Holy Chalice. All right? Holy Chalice is the cup that Jesus drank from at the Last Supper, if you believe in that. Also, that same cup was then used by Joseph of Arimathea to collect blood from Jesus at the crucifixion. That makes it a holy chalice. The Holy Grail is a fictional cup written about in Arthurian legends. When I say Arthurian legends, who am I talking about? King Arthur. King Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table. Now, King Arthur was a real king in about the 5th century, but he wasn't all that fabulous. All the legends that came out of it are afterwards, right? The Knights of the Round Table and all of Sir Galahad, Sir Lancelot, all of that stuff, that's all fiction. And you need to realize that, although King Arthur was a real king, everything that came with it, every 100 years they would build the legend. In those legends, the Holy Grail is a cup that's got magical powers. And sometimes you can drink from it and be sustained every day. One drink from the Grail and you're good, you don't need to eat. Sometimes it provides immortality. Drink from the Grail every year and you'll live forever. You'll get a year younger. Sometimes it's got magical healing powers if you are injured. The Fisher King gets injured. He drinks from the Holy Grail. He's now healthy. Sometimes it just provides happiness. So I want you to know that there are two separate things. The Holy Chalice, which has huge implications if you're a Christian. The Holy Grail is different. That's a cup and a book. Two totally different things. So, I think I'm going to put these two slides out of order. Let's go to this one. Here's the problem. The Grail and the Chalice stories end up merging. Nobody really calls it the Holy Chalice anymore, which is what anyone who goes to church, that's really what it is. That's the cup of the Last Supper. That's the cup of the crucifixion. There is zero mention of a Grail or chalice before the 12th century, other than in the Bible itself. date of the writing of the Bible is contested at best. In 1890, a French guy wrote the first story of the Grail, and it included, the hero was Percival. And if you watch Ready Player One, that's then transferred to Parzival, who finds the Holy Grail at the end of the movie, the egg. So, but that's the first story of the Grail, and then 20 years later, Robert de Boron takes that Grail and ties it to the Holy Chalice. So we've got this fictional Arthurian story of a Grail, and then 20 years later, this guy goes, haha, in the Bible we talk about this Holy Chalice. Let's combine the two. So now we've got an issue. Now we've got an absolutely fictional cup for 1,200 years there's no mention of, and now they're combined, and now everyone's looking for this. So we use the Holy Grail as a reference now. That's the Holy Grail of whatever. We're talking about, we're looking for a mystical cup. Right? We're looking at the cup that was at the Last Supper. That's what we're looking for. Now, this is a cup in Spain that they claim is the Holy Grail. This is the one. If you've spent any time in Europe, you've probably seen the Holy Grail. There's about 200 of them in Europe. If you've gone into churches, old European churches, you've probably seen splinters of the cross, or nails from the cross, or thorns from the crown that Jesus wore. I've been in Europe once, okay? I've seen 3 grails, all right? I've seen about 15 splinters of the cross, and I've seen 4 thorns. They're everywhere. Why?
There's only one, and it's like there's fake ones.
Well, how do you know?
I watched them.
This is the Grail. Prove it. I can't, but I'll tell you where. There's a story behind it. So, story then goes, Templars took over Jerusalem in 1191. Guess what they found?
Holy Grail.
They found the Holy Grail. 1191, they found the Holy Grail in Jerusalem. Take a step back. Look at the timing. Yes, they were in Jerusalem at this time. At the time that these stories merged the legend with the Holy Chalice, the Templars were in Jerusalem, in the holiest of places on earth. The Templars were there. So, the theory is that the Templars took the Grail. And as they were expelled from Jerusalem, they took these relics with them. Does that line up historically? Yes, it lines up historically. The timing of it is perfect for there to be legs to this story. The problem is, if you ask historians about the Holy Grail, they tell you this. There's no cup. There wasn't a cup for 1,200 years till a guy wrote a story. And then all of a sudden there's a cup. Seems a little too convenient that for 1,200 years there was no reference to this. 2 guys write stories within 20 years of each other, and now it's beautiful because the Templars in Jerusalem, they're expelled, and they've got secret, it's gone. So that's the story of the Holy Grail. Now, where is it? I'll get to that in a second. There's more relics, though. The Ark of the Covenant, if you watch the original Raiders of the Lost Ark, the first Indiana Jones. How many of you have seen that movie? You have to. You have to go see it. Okay? It's really fabulous. It's got the Ark, it's got archaeology, it's got Nazis dying, it's great. Okay? If you are a reader of the Bible, you know that in Exodus, where the 10 Commandments are given to Moses, brings them down from Mount Horeb, and they're smashed, and they're put in this ark. And that's where the 10 Commandments are kept. And it is described in the Bible as such, so every rendition of the ark makes sense. So, we do know that there was, historically speaking, not religiously speaking, historically speaking, there was an ark in the Temple of Solomon. What was in it, we don't know. But something described like this was in the Temple of Solomon, and it's written about. Problem is, the original Temple of Solomon in Jerusalem was destroyed by the Babylonians 2,600 years ago. That's the last we know of an ark existing. There's no record. So everything becomes speculation. Occam's razor says the simplest answer is usually correct. What likely happened to the Ark of the Covenant? It was destroyed when they destroyed the temple 2,600 years ago. But we don't want to believe that. We want to believe, right, that beautiful story that while in Jerusalem, the Knights Templar, the warriors of God, found this. We have to take it. Right? So there's a couple of stories here. One claims that they found it in Jerusalem, even though no one had mentioned it for 1,600 years. From 600 BC to 1100 AD, no one mentions the Ark. But the Templars show up and they found it, and then in secret, they took it to France. And it's in Chartres Cathedral. That's one theory. Another theory is that one Templar found it, the leader of the Templars at that point, and was like, sweet Ark. I'm taking that home with me. And then took it back to England and kept it in his house. It's a little less believable, all right? There are areas of Chartres Cathedral that are off limits to the public. That's where, and if you research Ark stuff, the Ark is set to be located somewhere in the neighborhood of 40 or 50 places on Earth. It's usually in some church that they won't let you see their basement. They don't deny it. Why? Because they want you to come to their church, pay the fee, come inside, take a look around. Ooh, maybe it's down there, right? Any of you have gone to sort of churches in Europe as tourist attractions, that's part of the process. So that's the Ark. Finally, the Shroud of Turin. This made waves again in the last 10 years. So if you don't have any idea what the Shroud of Turin is, this is what it looks like. It's linen. Okay? It's a linen, a shroud is a cloth. Okay? In 1898, an Italian photographer took a picture of the shroud and he reversed the negative. When he reversed the negative, he saw that, oh my gosh, there's a face there. And if you take a good hard look at this face, it is incredibly representative of the pictures of Jesus that are sort of everywhere. White guy, brown hair, beard, long hair, looks, right? That's the typical representation of Jesus. Whew, this is clearly Jesus. So, and it's a very, very old shroud. The theory is then that this is the shroud that covered, that they wrapped Jesus in after the crucifixion. Okay. I'm willing to listen. I'm very old. It's got this very eerie image on it. Let's see. What's the connection to the Templars? All right, well, there's two. Connection number one is that in the Fifth Crusade, they sacked the city of Constantinople, and in Constantinople they found the shroud, and then we kept that from that point on. Right? So that's the easiest, simplest connection. Here's the one that gets a little funky. We know for sure that no one displayed the shroud until 1357. No one publicly said, look at this, until 1357. There's no records. 1357 is 50 years after the dissolution of the Templars. The lead Templar at that point was Jacques de Molay. One of his best friends was a guy named Geoffrey Carney. Both were killed in 1307. The last leader of the Templars, right? Remember when they were arresting everyone and torturing everyone? The last leader of the Templars was Jacques de Molay, and he was hung on a door for about a week and a half. He was tortured. He was brought near to death, revived, tortured again. He was the last one to really admit anything. So the second theory here goes that as he was being recovered, they wrapped up Jacques de Molay in this linen. And damn if this doesn't look like a Templar, right? All the visions of Templars, long hair, beards for sure. And then the fact that it's carbon dated, the shroud has been carbon dated to the 13th century. Well, the 13th century is the very end of the 1200s, which is when this was taking place. The fact that it was first put on display by the family of one of the best friends of the last leaders of the Templar. Now, that begins to make a great story. No serious historians believe this either, because serious historians want proof. Oh, so you're saying that the family who first displayed it, 50 years later, one of their grandfathers knew the guy who was head of the Knights Templar at the end, and it could possibly be a Templar in there. Yeah, it's all super sketchy. Sort of the beauty of all of this, though, is that can't be proven, can't be disproven. And that's conspiracy theories. So, and it's romantic, right? It's romantic that these warriors for God would find all these biblical relics and protect them and keep them safe because we love that idea. But what do we really have of the Templars? Here's what's left. Templar legacy. Yeah. All that's really left of them for sure is this church in London. This was their headquarters. Now, it was bombed by the Germans in the 40s, because everything in London was bombed by the Germans in the 40s. They redid a lot of it. You can see some of the structures are original, but almost all of this has been redone. You can see the stuff that was reconstructed with it. But this was their early headquarters, and it was their headquarters for the entire length of the time of the Templars. This is where they did their secret initiation ceremonies, which makes them a secret society. And then in 1307, when they were dissolved, King Edward was like, sweet, I'm taking everything that's in there. So that's one of the things that's left from the Templars, the round church in London. In Portugal, there's a castle. Now, I'm just putting this up here. I'm not going to put the castle of Amaral on my exam. But this was their headquarters in Portugal. It's still there to this day. Why is that awesome? Because it's a 900-year-old castle that was used by the Templars. That's cool. So there's a tourist center here, and it's this really cute little castle on an outcropping. It's not terribly large, but if you know where Portugal is, that's not real helpful for a war in the Middle East. Okay, that's as far west in Europe as you can get, essentially, on the mainland, to be in Portugal. So after 1307, it was abandoned until the 1940s. It's in a swamp. No one wants it. But this looks like a lot of the little forts and strongholds that the Templars had. All right, so let's get back to the Grail for a second. If you read the book The Da Vinci Code, or if you watched the movie with Tom Hanks, this chapel here is the tie-in between the Templars and the Freemasons. Here's the story. When the Templars were being arrested in 1307, the leader took a small group of Templars, about 10, and said, I need you to escape the city and take the treasures with you. Go to Scotland, and if you were a fan of Braveheart, Robert the Bruce, who continually betrays William Wallace, eventually becomes a friend of the Templars, and in Scotland, we do see that there were some Templars that ended up escaping to Scotland. This chapel was built 150 years after the Knights Templar. This is the rumored place where they hid the Grail. This is one of the places, if there was a Grail, that there would have been. This is the connection between the Freemasons and the Templars, because there's Templar symbols there and there's Freemason symbols there. Freemasons don't really appear until about 1400. The Templars disappeared in 1300. But if there were sort of Templars living in Scotland afterwards, and they continued the traditions until the Freemasons caught on in Scotland, maybe that's the connection, but that's a thin maybe. This is one of the most visited places in Scotland, especially after the Dan Brown book. The people who work here are like, there's no Grail! It's not here, I swear to God, we looked. Okay, they get a little bit tired of people. Hey, so seriously, it's in the basement, isn't it? No, it's not here. All right, so That's one of the possible resting points. If you have spent 6 years like me wasting your time with the Curse of Oak Island, you're familiar with this hellhole off the coast of Nova Scotia. The theory is that, yes, they stopped in Scotland, they got the temple built, but that was a red herring. What they really did was they crossed the Atlantic with the treasure to keep it safe. Now, many of you would think, gosh, 1300 they crossed the Atlantic? That doesn't make any sense because the first person to cross the Atlantic Ocean was Christopher Columbus in 1492, which they're still teaching in schools. And by the way, I wrote an angrily worded letter to my children's teachers who actually, my kids came home with a worksheet that said, how Columbus discovered America. Well, that's just not true, and it hasn't been true for like ever.
So he pays a fraud.
What's that?
So like Columbus Day is like a fraud.
Yes!
Yeah.
Yeah. It's one of the dumbest holidays, historically speaking. The Vikings were in North America as early as 1000. The Chinese were in America in like 800. So, like, it's not Christopher Columbus in 1492. Sail the ocean blue. All right. Is it possible that Templars made it to Canada? Yeah, because other people did. The Vikings certainly did. And where were some of the Vikings outcroppings? In Scotland! Oh! Connecting the dots here. And that's what conspiracy theories and people that love to do this, they're connecting the dots. And they told the Templars how to get to Canada. Now, in the last season of Curse of Oak Island, on this island they found a Templar cross. The Templar cross was dated about 1180. Now, whether they actually found it or it's a reality show and they planted it, which is certainly more likely to keep viewers from watching because it was 6 years if they haven't found anything yet. The thought is the Grail may be buried here, right? Where is it? Historians are going to tell you there is no Grail. Other people are going to tell you the Grail in Spain or the Grail here or the Great Hill. Kind of up to you, and that's kind of hard. So the lesson is, what's the answer? Well, who are you going to believe? Are you going to believe a religious scholar? And the church has got no saying on any of these things. They don't step in and say anything about the Ark or the Grail or the Shroud, even though everybody wants them to, because once they go on record, well, the church does go back on their records from time to time, too. So, this is sort of the last vestiges of the Knights Templar in our lore. The Assassin's Creed games keep it going with the Assassins and the Templars, and that's all sort of fun, but not necessarily historically accurate. What do you think? Good stuff? Yeah? Hey, you two guys sat in a class. Did you like it? Did you learn something? Yeah? Did you know it all already? Okay, good. Tomorrow we will talk about Freemasons. And maybe some of you can go join the local Freemason Lodge. Joe's going to go join the one in Franklin Park, okay, the Leiden branch with Frank. So that'll be fun. You guys will become Masons. It's going to be great. Thank you, Matt.